Welcome to FACT's webinar called Sheep Shearing, the New Zealand Method. Our presenter is Amber Van Hove. This webinar is hosted by Food Animal Concerns Trust. I am Larissa McKenna, FACT's Humane Farming Program Director, and I will be moderating the webinar today. Thank you for joining us. To begin with a few quick introductions, FACT is a national nonprofit organization and we are headquartered in Illinois. We promote the safe and humane production of meat, milk, and eggs. I direct FACT's Humane Farming Program, which provides a number of opportunities for livestock and poultry farmers. And this webinar is part of our Humane Farming webinar series. Please visit our website to learn more about all of our farmer services, including our mentorship program and the heaps of other webinars we have coming up this winter. So at this time, I'm delighted to introduce our presenter, Amber Van Hove. Amber is the owner of Barnhart Fields Farm in Washington State, where she raises Shetland sheep for wool. Amber is a certified national sheep shearer and runs Northwest Shearing, where she provides shearing services to local flocks and hobby farms. Last year, Amber received a scholarship from FACT to attend the University of California Shearing School. We are very, very lucky to have her with us today. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Amber so she may begin her presentation. Amber, please take it away.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm just going to, there we go, flip over to the first page there. I just wanted to say hello to everyone and thank you for joining the webinar today. Just going over that poll from the beginning, it was interesting to see. So those, a lot of people that have seen sheep shearing done but haven't tried it before, I hope after this webinar you'll be able to have the courage to give it a try for yourself. And it also looked like a bunch of people there have done it, a few times, but they're interested in learning a bit more about it. So I hope that you guys can pick up some tips from this webinar. All right, so I'll just get right into it. A little bit more of an introduction, who I am. Larissa kind of gave a basic intro, but I'll give you a little bit more. I live in Washington State on the West Coast here with my family. Like she mentioned, I do have a small Shetland sheep farm. I have some other farm critters as well here, and that does include one crazy little border collie. Which is kind of token when you have sheep, and he's good. He helps me out with the sheep, so he earns his keep, that's for sure. So people have asked me a lot. I get this question a lot. They've said to me, how in the world did you get into sheep shearing? It's not something that you hear that people do that often. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about that. Oddly, my introduction into sheep shearing was through a bet that I had with my brother-in-law a while back. We were joking around one day and he was kind of bugging me about my sheep. And he said, why do you have these sheep? What do you do with them? I bet you'll never do anything with your sheep. And so we were bantering back and forth and I ended up betting him. And I said to him, I bet you I will go from sheep to knitting a pair of socks with my sheep. And I will do every process of that in between and I'll do it all myself. So I made this silly bet with him, and needless to say, that was a huge undertaking. And I then had to go about learning every step of processing fiber. So it started out with, okay, now I need to learn how to shear sheep. So I started looking around into that, and I ended up looking into training through the University of California through their agriculture extension. Which is in Hopwood, California. And I applied to that program and got in and went through their program there and ended up being certified at the end of that as a sheep shearer. Oddly enough, according to some people, I really enjoyed it. And it turned out to be something that I really enjoyed doing. So I followed that a little further and I ended up starting my own business when I saw that there was a huge need for sheep shearers in my area. And actually, there is a huge need for sheep shearers in many areas. So I ended up starting up Northwest Shearing. And actually, not too far in the future here, I'm going to be taking an advanced shearing course through the Washington State University. Okay. So just a quick outline as to what I'm going to be talking about today. First of all, I'm going to go over animal welfare. That is one of the most important aspects when you're dealing with sheep shearing, and why do we shear sheep. Then I'm going to talk about wool, the equipment, processing equipment, shearing equipment, and then most importantly, I'm going to talk about the different shearing techniques, the New Zealand method most of all, but I'm also going to touch on some other methods like slick shearing, stand shearing, and other things like that. And then at the end, hopefully we'll have some time and you guys can ask whatever questions you may have for me. Okay, so animal welfare. So how does this all fit in with FACT and their mission? Thought I'd just go over that briefly. Because shearing can actually be a controversial topic. But what I want to do is explain the importance of shearing and the need for it and actually how that relates to animal welfare. So sheep in general, as you may probably all know if you have your own sheep, they can be flighty creatures. They actually respond best to calm and easy handling. When sheep are handled calmly and quietly and with low stress, they actually respond much better to routine management tasks. So what are routine management tasks that sheep have to undergo? So for example, when they get their worming medication, hoof trimming, vaccines, lambing, and of course shearing. Shearing is one of the management things that they need to undertake. So what are some of the signs that sheep are experiencing stress? I have a list here. Basically, it's not an entire list of everything that you might see, but some of the main things are panting, an increased respiratory rate, tooth grinding, restlessness, nervousness, which you can see in sheep if they're kind of taking off or running away, and you see them herding together. That's what they do to kind of create comfort. Also, if you see that they're not eating or if there's poor growth rate or poor reproductive performance. And those ones on the bottom there, those are more for like prolonged periods of stress. You would see things like that. So there is a difference between prolonged stress and temporary stress. And that's kind of briefly what I want to touch on. If sheep have to undergo prolonged periods where they have to make extreme adjustments to cope with physical and environmental situations, that's something that you definitely want to avoid. But some things that may cause temporary stress, this is quite common. So for example, in those management procedures, when you're giving vaccines or shearing, worming, those things like that, those cause temporary stress signs. And as long as you're following the guidelines, like a low stress handling guideline, which the American Sheep Industry Association, they have a guideline specifically that talks about low stress handling. And if you're following those guidelines, then things should be fine. And it's considered that the pros outweigh the cons in relation to that, because the management procedures need to be done for sheep health. So sheep care. It's interesting because the domestication of sheep has been a part of our human way of life for thousands of years. We are the ones that domesticated and have bred sheep in order to produce wool for us that doesn't naturally shed off. So as a result of that, sheep need to be sheared. So that's kind of something that, we did, and therefore we're responsible for taking care of the sheep. So today, wool in the fabric industry is concentrated mostly in the areas of like active wear, outdoor wear, and actually military clothing. So that's where you'll see it most commonly, where you're going to see wool fabric. But there are actually other uses for wool. For example, obviously you see yarn in yarn shops. There's felting products. There's blankets made of wool, insulation actually in houses and buildings that use wool. paddings under horse saddles. Those are made of wool. Carpets, the pads actually in pianos under the hammer, the key hammers, are made out of wool. Odor absorbers are made out of wool. I mean, the list goes on and on of where wool is used. So it might be surprising to some of you, might not be to others, but it's actually a valuable, very valuable commodity, and it generates more than $37 million in income in the sheep industry per year. So, but the interesting part about that is that that sum is actually only 10% of the sheep producers in America. So those are the large industrial, large-scale sheep producers. They produce 10%, 10% of them is what produces all that wool products. So the 90% of producers are small flocks of under 100. So that's probably, well, that's me, and that's probably, the majority of you listening today. So who shears, for these people, the 90% of sheep producers out there that have less than 100 sheep in their flock? And where does this wool go to? So in general, a lot of the wool from these smaller farms go to specialized markets, specialized fiber markets and stuff like that. And shearers for these farmers are actually often harder to find. And you often have, these small flock farmers doing it themselves. So shearing is not only, though, for the fiber market. It's also mainly done for the sheep's well-being. So I have on there that meat and fiber sheep both require shearing. Why is that? Well, for their well-being, right? So shearing sheep ultimately improves their vision, which is important. It limits manure and dirt contamination that gets caught up in the fiber in the wool. Limits fly strike, which is really important, especially in some hotter areas of the States, and prevents heat exhaustion as well, which is also very important. Okay, so here's a picture of a shearing facility. This is something that you might typically see in either New Zealand or England. This is a larger shearing shed. There are some of these shearing sheds here in the States, but more often what you would see around here are mobile shearing sheds. So these are trailers that move from large farm to farm where they have, a crew of shearers that's inside them that run the machines and shear the sheep. But overall, this is what it would look like, where you see the clean board there, and that's important. Then you have the catch facilities behind where the sheep are, and then you need to have the doorway there where you see the openings where the sheep would be released into. So why do you see that I have a picture here of something that's very clean, the floor is clean, and why is that important? Wool quality and maintaining the quality of the wool is really important. So in reducing the contaminants, which I'm actually going to go into the next slide. I'll kind of explain that a little bit more. But also the holding pens behind the doorways there, those are usually kind of smaller, tighter pens where the sheep are kept. The boards are there so they can't see out, and that is in order to keep the sheep calm through the process while they're waiting to be shorn. And afterwards, when they're finished and they go in through those little dark holes there, which is actually kind of like a ramp that leads them down and out. And that leads them then out into their pasture area where they're going to get their food and their water, which is basically seen as their reward for having, finished their maintenance and their shearing that they needed to go through. Okay, so a little bit about what I mentioned there, the wool quality and why that is important. Why does it matter if there's contaminants and stuff in the wool? Well, actually, these contaminants end up getting stuck to the wool. And if this wool ends up in the overall wool supply, it degrades the value of American wool in general, which is really important to the wool industry to have a high quality of wool when you're out there competing against like New Zealand and Australia and places like that. So, but for your own sake, if you're shearing, wool for yourself, it is also important that you want to keep things like dirt out, vegetable matter, paint, polypropylene twine, which is what's often on bales of hay, colored fibers getting mixed in with white fibers, tags, which is ear tags and stuff like that. It's important to keep those pieces out because those little things get stuck in the wool and it ends up being in the final product, which isn't very desirable if you're wanting to sell your wool down the road. So one of the things that can be done from the very beginning is actually sorting your sheep prior to shearing. Some people have all the same kind of sheep on their farm, but a lot of people actually have mixes. So what you're going to want to do is prior to shearing is sort them by breed, wool type, and color of wool. And so by wool type, I mean, is it a fine type of wool, medium, or coarse? And then breed and color of wool. And you're going to want to shear the fine wooled sheep first so that the coarse stuff doesn't get mixed in later on. If you have white sheep and then different colored sheep, you're going to want to do the white ones first and then bring in the colored sheep later on. Okay, so this is just I'm going to quickly talk about some of the wool sorting equipment. This is a skirting table. These are skirting tables. They look all sorts of different ways. You can make them yourself. They're pretty basic, just a table that's breathable, basically. And what happens is after the fleece is taken off of the sheep, the fiber, like you can see the lady there on the right, she's tossing it onto the table. And on a table like that, that's where all the contaminants are picked out. So here, what is skirting and handling? Here, there's a whole bunch of fleece on a table there. So what happens at this stage? This actually could be a whole other webinar. This is a detailed topic, a complex topic. I don't know everything about it, so I'm not going to get into all of it because you could take courses on this alone. But basically, I'll just go over what happens after the fleece is tossed onto the table here. It gets skirted. Inferior wool gets basically picked out. So things that have stains on it, tags, if there's skin pieces on there, if there's belly wool, vegetable matter, stuff like that. Once that's all taken out, the fleece is then folded. So the sides are folded into the middle, and then it's rolled skin side out, and then it's packaged. Okay, so let's get into the actual shearing part here. What kind of equipment is needed when you shear? I have a little picture there of the hand shears. Some people still use those. Some people actually really like hand shears like that because they're quiet. They don't make a lot of noise that, it doesn't scare the sheep as much. Some people don't use them at all because it takes a long time. So they think that, making the sheep sit there or stand there for hand shearing takes a lot longer. So they prefer to use the machines. It's kind of a personal preference in that regard. But, top of the list there, you need some sort of shearing handpiece. You either need a manual one or you need a clipper machine. What else do you need? You need combs and cutters. And I'll go over that in the next couple slides as to what exactly combs and cutters are. You're going to need oil for your blades. You're going to need a comb brush to clean out all the fiber that gets stuck in there. Most importantly, actually, is you're going to need a piece of plywood. It's pretty basic. That's what you're going to do your shearing on if you're doing this method. And then you're going to need some first aid items. Cuts can happen. Sometimes on the sheep and sometimes on yourself. So you need to kind of be aware of that as well. One of the important things is if you are sharing shearing equipment with, say, a neighbor farm or some friends or whatnot, you do want to make sure that you disinfect the equipment between each use. So if it's, you and a group of people that are sharing equipment, make sure it's disinfected before you bring it onto your farm and use it on your sheep. Also make sure that you're using sharp combs and cutters before you start. And if in your own flock you have sheep that perhaps one has an infection or one has a boil that you end up running into as you're shearing, you want to disinfect your combs and cutters between that sheep and then the next one, because you don't want to pass on any infection that one sheep may have had to the next sheep. So this is one example. This is the setup that I have. This is a motor with a drop shaft. This is one that I use. This is something that's suitable for someone that has kind of a small business that's servicing small flocks and farms. And the reason that we use this kind of setup is because the motor is separate from the handpiece. So the handpiece doesn't get hot when you're using it because it doesn't have the motor actually in the handpiece. It's a little bit smaller, so it's more maneuverable. The setup can easily be, taken from farm to farm. So basically, this is a setup where you have the piece of plywood there, the motor, and then the handpiece down below. And you see how in one picture, one sheep was just shorn, so it's dirty. I have a broom there. You have to broom it off in between each sheep, and then you can pull the next sheep on and start there. So that's what I use. That would be a setup kind of for a small business. This next one is what most people would get if they're shearing their own sheep and, maybe some friends. So this is a shearing clipper machine. Some of the popular brands that are out there and some of the good quality ones, they're Premier One. They have a good setup. Oster has a good one. This one here in the picture is a Heiniger clipper. Lister also has a good one. A set like this is probably going to set you back a few $100s for the clipping machine. And then you have combs and cutters that you want to consider getting as well. So on the right there on the top, I have a picture of it's a 13-tooth comb. And behind it, you see a 4-point cutter. It's not the best picture of the cutter, but the cutter is there behind. And you want to make sure that when you're setting it up on your handpiece there, that your comb the tips are above where the cutter is. So the cutter has to be lower than the tips of the comb. And that's so that the comb can kind of get in under the wool before it starts cutting. Because it's the 4-point blade that kind of swings back and forth. And that's the thing that's actually going to be cutting the fiber. So you'll see below there's different types of combs. That's just an example of two, but there's actually tons of different types of combs. And the more teeth you have on a comb, the less chance you have of cutting the sheep or yourself. So that's the benefit to having more teeth, but it is slower. So the more experienced you get, the wider, the less amount of teeth you can use. It makes it go a little bit faster. So someone that's a professional shearer coming in, they'll probably be using a 13-tooth comb or some even a 9, but most would be a 13-tooth comb. So if you're starting out, I would maybe recommend that you start with a 20-tooth and work your way down to a 13. Okay, so getting ready. Right before you're going to be shearing your sheep, the day before, you want to make sure that they're off food and water for about 8 hours. And this has been studied and approved by the New Zealand SPCA. Why do we want to do this? For multiple reasons. It's mostly for the comfort. Well, there's a few reasons. One is for the comfort of the sheep. They're going to be kind of moved around, balled up and a little bit squished and stuff. So they don't want to have full stomachs before they're going through their shearing. The second is to prevent cuts. If they're more comfortable, they're going to be moving around less, kicking around less, which is good. And also the third reason is that so that there's less contamination on the shearing board. If you're not getting manure on the shearing board, then you're going to have less contamination in that regard. So if you do get a cut, which can happen, small cuts on the sheep are not a big deal. It happens, it's common. Those can usually heal on their own. Sheep heal really fast. If it's a larger cut, you want to make sure that you have on hand. One example of an antiseptic solution is Blue Coat. Sure, if you have sheep already of your own, you know what Blue Coat is, but it's an antiseptic spray that comes out blue, and you would spray it on the wound. If you're in areas where the weather is warmer, you're also going to want to spray on there a fly repellent so that you don't get flies in the wound. So after a sheep is shorn, it should be given, its reward, which is access to either pasture or free area and food and water. It should also it should also have access to shelter, whether it's in hot weather or cold weather. It's going to need some adjustment time. And on the last thing there I have is dry sheep. So you want to shear your sheep dry. You don't want to shear wet sheep. If your wool, it's harder to get through. If your wool is wet at the end, it can rot and mold. So we don't recommend doing that at all. Okay, so you think you're ready to shear sheep. I'm just going to say, do yourself a favor, make sure that you have stretched and warmed up, because it can be hard on your back, your hamstrings, your leg muscles, your arms, and your wrists. So make sure you do some stretching before and afterwards. You will be thankful that you did. So I do have, okay, so the New Zealand shearing method, that's what I'm going to talk about mostly. I will go into some other methods briefly as well afterwards. But where did this method come from, and who is Godfrey Bowen? The New Zealand shearing method can also sometimes be referred to as the Bowen method. Godfrey Bowen is actually a New Zealander. He founded the art and technique of this shearing method. So he's kind of the inventor of it. He then traveled around and he brought this method around the world, and it was adopted by Great Britain, Australia, the United States, Russia, Japan, and India. So all the major wool producers have adopted his method of shearing. So I do have a video clip here, and I think it's worth showing because
I put this right hand foreleg, just took it back.
That's okay. Okay, so this is the video clip, and it'll give you kind of a feel for what the process looks like. It is a little bit loud, so you might want to turn your volume down a bit if you're finding it a little bit loud. But I'll press play here, watch it, get a feel for how the method works and how he's moving with the sheep. And after the video clip, I'll explain the different steps. We'll go through each of the steps. All right, so here we go.
Just behind my leg, so it gives me a complete clear run. When I'm going to fully shear this sheep, I start up at the top of the brisket, right down to the flank on each side. So this is the belly wool. That must come off first. Just breaking open the belly wool. That's the belly wool. I just put the belly wool out to one side.
Okay, so what he's saying there is he has a bit of an accent, so I hope you guys can understand him. But he's taking off the belly wool and he's putting that out to one side, because actually the belly wool and what he's going to be doing next, which is called the crutch area, that has the most contaminants on it. So he's separating that from the rest of the wool.
Just out the top of the leg, use my left hand and right around the crutch. Into the first hind leg. Using the left hand to stretch out the skin, the second lower right down towards the backbone, keeping the bottom tooth on the skin all the time. Just cleaning, holding the tail and control that one blow on the upper side of the backbone, just rolling the sheep over, and one full blow underneath the backbone. I move forward with my left foot, roll the sheep through with my right, and my right foot into the deep hind leg. Start on the top side of the brisket, up.
I'm just going to pause it here for a second. He skips the top part of the sheep's head here because this breed of sheep doesn't have actually wool on her top of her head. I'll go through the steps again later, but this is, before you do the neck, you would also do the top of the sheep's head.
And coming out directly underneath the skin. Breaking open the neck wool just on the upper side. Just cleaning off the feet. Just back up right to the ear. Just holding the ear with my left hand and moving the sheep around to get her parallel with the dropper, right around for the long blows. Dropping down into the first shoulder. Now the sheep is right around, parallel with the dropper here for the long blows. My left toe in underneath the sheep's shoulder. Now all the weight on my left foot, my left hand on the back of the head, and I step over with my right foot. I'll just find the backbone here, and then it's one full blow over the backbone. Right foot up underneath the wool, the sheep's head in against my knees, turn off the cheek, fingers underneath the cheekbone, lock the head between my knees, and turn to come down the last side. Stepping back with my left foot. Right down to the flank.
So you see here how his feet are moving with every kind of position that he changes. His feet are moving in tandem with the sheep. He's going to bring in here a student, and that student or the new person is going to try a couple of blows, and you'll kind of see the difference between someone that's experienced and someone that's just starting out for a little bit here.
And out the back leg. And now might be a good time to get some help things off this sheep. Your big moment has come.
Nice, where you will be.
Now, if you see what my feet are,
Yeah.
you see like that, I'll let you have the sheep's head up like this. Yeah. It's actually easier to control the sheep.
Yeah.
And your foot in here, just around here. And now you can hold it right down on the skin to vibrate it. So
Okay.
just go nice and easy, not like this, nice and flat down along.
Okay.
Now I'll be ready to stop it if anything happens anyway.
Okay. Where's our arm switch?
I'll do that. I'll
Okay.
control that for
Fair
you.
enough. Right.
So now we have a new shearer trying the skills of shearing. And I think we actually might be entering them into competition in the World Championships down in Gorey. I reckon this is just too easy, really. Keep right down on the skin. And just use your left hand here. That just rolls over. Start back here now. Yeah, right. So not a little bit there, but I can actually finish off.
Alright. So leave here first.
It's a bit awkward.
So he's telling him there, make sure you keep the comb right next to the skin of the sheep, because that way it's going to get through the fiber the easiest, right next to the skin. And he's just going to finish off the sheep quickly here himself.
Actually, no.
Good man.
Very good.
Sorry, sheep.
Okay, so that's the end of the clip there. We'll get back to page, I think it's 17 of the slides. You will do that, Larissa? Or if I just flip through. Oh, there we go, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to go over, that was pretty quick, so I want to go through the steps with you. And basically what they say is when you're learning about shearing and they're teaching you this method, they say to you, it's like a dance. So we all laughed at that, initially when we're in the training course, but it's pretty true. Your feet are moving along in tandem as you're moving the sheep. And so you kind of have to learn to move together, just like people that are learning to dance together. So there I have the list of the steps that you go through. Where you start and where you end with the sheep. So you're starting at the belly area and you're moving all the way down. So I'm going to go through each stage with you here. Okay, so step 1 and 2. So where he is, like if you just refer back to the video there, he's behind the sheep and so the first thing you need to do is you need to get the sheep on its rear end. And you're going to have it leaning on one hip. You don't want the sheep sitting on its tailbone. It's going to start kicking and it's not going to like that. So the sheep is going to be, you can tell there too, it's leaning on a hip and you're going to be doing about 4 or 5, they call them blows down the belly. So in order to, to kind of get started, you need to make sure that you're getting the comb from your cutter, from your shearing clipper, right against the skin there, and you're kind of holding it flat, not the tips in, but just flat against the skin so you get a good start. So you're going to be doing the 4 or 5 blows down the belly there and opening up the belly and separating out that wool. And then you're going to be going down the first leg there and coming around through what's called the crutch, and then down the second leg. So all that wool there will be kind of off to the side. It's got the contaminants in it, and it's usually pretty dirty. So that's your first section there with the sheep sitting kind of up against your legs. Okay, steps 3 to 5. This is where you're going to roll the sheep's first leg there back towards you, and you're going to be doing about 5 blows over that first back leg. The next slide where the sheep is leaning even further towards your leg there, it's called step 4. It's called the undermine. And that's basically where you're getting the rear end of the sheep, where he was near the tail there. So you want to, make sure that you're careful around the tail. You're doing under it and kind of, taking the wool off the tail as well for the sheep that do have them. And then number 5, which is the step that he skipped because the sheep didn't have face wool. But that's where you're going to sit the sheep up a bit more, and you're going to expose her head, and you're going to get step 5 there, which is called the top knot. And that's where you're going to just have a couple blows back and clear the top knot, or clear the front face of the sheep. Okay, steps 6 through 7. When you have the sheep's face in your hand for the previous step 5, you're going to use that left hand there, and you're going to turn the sheep's head back. You're kind of going to open up the neck area, and you're going to lean its head onto your leg there. You're going to rest it on your leg. And you're going to start with the inside of the sheep's neck. So you're going to do 2 blows up the inside of the neck, and then you're going to rotate the sheep's head back towards your leg so that it turns the neck over to its other side. And you're going to do 2 blows up the outside of the sheep's neck. So there's the inside of the neck, rotate the head back towards you, and do the outside of the sheep's neck. So after that, you've done the neck, so it's opening up there. You're going to just continue to roll the sheep back towards you, and then you're going to open up the top of that shoulder there. So you see how in step 9 and 10, the shearer there is using his left arm quite a bit to control the neck and the head of the sheep. So after you expose the shoulder, the top of the shoulder there, you're going to go down the arm. And then you see how he uses his left hand to grab the sheep's leg and to finish off the shoulder there and under the shoulder. So your left hand does actually quite a bit of work, even though it's not holding the clippers. It's the hand and the arm that's controlling the sheep and pulling the skin tight into the direction that's best for the clippers. Then this part gets a little bit easier, actually. This is when, with his left hand there, he has the head and he lays the sheep down across his feet. And this is where you can start some of the long blows. Then in step 11 there, he starts doing the flank and back towards the back. And then he does in step 12, 2 long blows up by the spine, one on each side of the spine, up to the head of the sheep. In step 13, that's where you're going to start moving backwards, and you're going to roll the sheep's head up, and then it's going to end up between your legs. You saw in the video there where he kind of grabbed the sheep and used its ear a little bit as leverage and rolled it backwards toward him, and then put the sheep's head between his legs. And that's to keep the sheep tight, to keep its skin tight and in control while he's doing the shearing down its last shoulder. So in step 14, this is the last shoulder. You see he's still got the sheep's head out a little bit there, but in step 15, you see the sheep's head now is between his legs. He's done 2 blows on the last shoulder, and then in step 15, he's doing the last part of the flank, and then he's stepping back even more and rolling the sheep back even more and exposing the final last leg there. And he's using his free left hand to push down kind of a little bit into the sheep there to pull the skin tight around the left leg or the last leg there. So in this last section here, it's kind of like you're rolling the sheep up into a ball and you're stepping backwards slowly to expose a little bit more and more, and as the final parts of the fleece come off. So those, 16 steps are, the outline of the New Zealand shearing method. You can see that his free hand in the video there is being used a lot to control the sheep, and his feet are almost always underneath the sheep, keeping it under control. So that's a quick overview of the different positions for it. So the one exception is if you have a ram or a wether. The difference with rams and wethers are going to be in step one. So in step one, where you're doing exposing the belly on the first step, this is where it's going to look different. As opposed to going straight down on all 4 blows, you're actually going to stop in the middle. And that's important because you don't want to hit the pizzle, which is right there in the middle. You're actually going to stop, and then you're going to come at the side and go up sideways toward the pizzle there. And that's important because you don't want to make any cuts there for the ram. Another thing about rams is sometimes they're huge. Sometimes you can't get them sitting on their rear ends like that. And that's happened to me numerous times. In those cases, I've usually asked someone to help me. Sometimes you have rams that just aren't going to cooperate, and you're going to end up shearing them any way you can. And that's the way they teach you in the schools too. Whatever part that they're exposing to you, that's the part that you're going to shear. With rams, you can't always be too picky and too precise as to how you get them shorn. Sometimes you just have to deal with what you have at the time. Okay, so if you use this method of shearing, the New Zealand style of shearing, this is what you should end up with at the end. I mean, granted, this won't happen the first time or, the first few times, but this is the reason why this method is so widely adopted in so many places, is because the result is a full fleece. And this is important when it comes to skirting and handling the fleece afterwards. To have the fleece all in one piece like that, then it gets, thrown onto the table, and the processing is much quicker and easier that way. So this is some of the fleeces from my sheep. I think this was from, last spring after shearing them. Okay, so what are some alternate methods of shearing? I'm going to quickly go over some of these, making sure that we have enough time at the end for some questions. So one of the other alternate shearing techniques is called slick shearing. I don't know if you might have heard this before. This is often used for in 4-H and in show sheep. So this is done on a shearing stand. And sometimes this is easier with certain sheep because if they're 4-H sheep, they've been handled a lot by the 4-H participants, so they're quite tame. You can get them up onto the stand. Slick shearing specifically means that this is going to be a very smooth shear. Time is not of the essence here. And it's got a different pattern, of course, that you're going to be using because it's up on the stand. So if someone ever refers to slick shearing, that's what it means. And it refers specifically to show cuts of shearing. Okay, so what if this is another form of shearing which looks similar to slick shearing, but it is different. So if you are not concerned with time, and having to do a quick shear, which is what the New Zealand method is used for, quickly getting through a whole bunch of sheep. If you're not concerned with time, or say you have physical limitations and you can't be rolling a sheep around on the ground, that's just not something that's physically possible for you. Or if it's not important to you that you get your fleece all off in one piece, like the New Zealand method does. This is a method that you can use. This was actually a farm expo that I went to not too long ago. And they do demos there of different types of shearing. And this is one that an elderly lady was demonstrating. This is a sheep stand or a goat stand, and it can be lowered down. The sheep can be walked up onto the stand. The sheep is wearing a halter there, and it's attached at the front, so it's tied, and there's a chain around it there so that it can't take off on her. The stand is then cranked up to the appropriate height, and she has her shearing machine there. You can see the cord, and it's in her right hand, and she's just shearing that sheep the best way that she can. So it's not all going to come off in one big piece there, but this is the way she does it, and this is the way that it can be done by people too that may have physical limitations or aren't comfortable doing, having the sheep on the ground and moving it around that way. Okay, I'm going to touch briefly on a few other animals, because often people that have sheep also have either alpacas or llamas for fiber, or they have them as guard animals. So they want to know how to shear them as well. There's a couple different ways that you can do shearing for these animals. On the left, there's a picture of some restraints, and those are used. You can see there in the right picture, the alpaca there is restrained. Its front and back legs are put in the restraints, and it's gently laid down there, and it's gently kind of stretched out so that it can't kick and move around. And in this situation, the sheep is shorn on the one side, and then the helpers there, they flip him over, and then the other side is shorn as well. So that's one method of shearing alpacas. You can do them on the floor here, on a blanket or a mat, or they can also be done on a table like this. This is another method of also doing either alpacas and llamas. This is a shearing stand that I have, and that's an alpaca in there. So you could do it that way, where they're just walked into there, and the stand is used as kind of a restraint on the halter there in the front. Another way, on the picture on the right, is a llama. This is just using a halter, and it's just tied to a post. So that's also possible. The thing you have to be careful with these methods is you have to really be careful. They can kick you if you walk around behind there. They don't like to have their legs touched at all. So you really have to be careful in these situations when they're not restrained. Just being aware of where their feet are and what parts of them you're touching at the time. So, okay, where to learn to shear if you want to have more info on this, or if you want to have some practice doing this. I highly recommend university extensions, and not all universities have this. So this may be something that you may have to travel to. So myself specifically, I had to travel down to California to get into the university extension where they were teaching their shearing program. So that is one option, which is a good option. They do a really thorough job of giving you hands-on practice and experience of that. But say you can't do that, or you can't make a trip, or you can't find one around you. Actually, there are a lot of community local events where there's sheep or fiber exhibitions going on. There's farm expos, things like that. I've attended a few already myself locally, where they have people who will do demos of different types of shearing methods, and they'll sometimes give you some hands-on practice for those too. And those are usually local, and they're one-day events. Another kind of last option, there's always YouTube. Watching YouTube videos of shearing can be very helpful to kind of get you started. If you want to get, sometimes the visual part is really helpful. So my last thing that I kind of want to mention is some of you may be, totally into doing this yourself and want to give it a try. Others of you may want to find someone to shear for you, because it is a big job. I've heard from many people, finding a shearer they're hard to find. Where do we find them? So I'm just going to give you some, I don't have this written on the slide there, but I'm going to give you some places that you can look and maybe write this down, and you can go have a look for yourself. But places like, for example, feed stores, where you buy your feed for your animals. There's usually like a posting board there. Look on those boards. Local shearers, they'll post their information or business cards on them. One of the main places that I've found works really well is actually local Facebook groups. So for example, in my area, we have a couple of Facebook pages. One of them is called the Whatcom County Farmers Facebook page, the Whatcom County Sheep and Goat page. You can always find information and advice in those pages. You can post a question, say, hey, anybody know of a local shearer? Those are great resources. They're always active and they're current. That's where all of our local shearers post their business information. You can look on also places like Craigslist for shearers. Your local fiber and yarn shops, they buy from local fiber producers, and they will probably know local shearers that they can direct you to. The last couple of vet clinics, you can ask a local vet if they know a local shearer. And the last one that I'll mention is the state sheep producer directory, which is usually an online directory that you can look at. They'll usually have a list of shearers. Sometimes some of them are current and sometimes they aren't. So like I said, the most current stuff is usually going to be a Facebook group or something in your local feed shop where you can find that information. So that's a lot of information that I just kind of all blurted out there for you guys. I want to say thank you for attending. If you have some questions now, we have a little bit of time where Larissa can maybe look through some of the questions and see if there's anything specific that I could help you answer.
Yes, we do have just a couple minutes. So if folks do have questions that they want answered, I just want to say thank you, Amber, for you brought that kind of dynamic practice to life, even though we're just, using slides. So yeah. That was a really wonderful presentation. So if folks do have questions, there are a couple that came in. I'll read them. And then if we don't have time to answer them today, there'll be other opportunities for follow-up. But the question is, can you please discuss cutter sharpening?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good one, actually. I didn't mention that. Combs and cutter sharpening. Most likely it's not something you can do yourself. I don't do it myself either. There's a special, it's like a concave, and a grinder that you have. I'm trying to remember which one it is. It's not a regular grinder that you use for it. So I actually send them away, and you can send them away. Your combs and cutters, don't throw them out after they're dull. They can be used again, but you do need to send them away to get sharpened. And places that sharpen them are like Premier One. They'll sharpen them. It's like $2 a comb, $1.50 for a cutter to sharpen it. I have a shearing friend in California, actually, that I send mine to. So I stockpile them all and I'll send them all out in a box. But you do have to have them done on a special grinder that has a curve on it, and it should be done by a professional.
Along those lines, do you have a recommendation for the best comb to use for Shetlands?
Yeah, I have Shetland sheep. So I use which is in my video there, I use the 13-tooth comb. The one that's on my slide there. You can get the American steel ones from Premier One, which are really good quality. You can also get a little bit of a cheaper version on some other websites. I think it's Longhorn, some other couple of shearing sites. But I use a 13-tooth comb on the Shetlands because their fiber is long and they're a little bit sticky sometimes. So you need a bit of freedom to kind of work underneath there. Oh, one other thing I want to quickly mention about Shetlands and long fibered sheep. You should actually shear them twice a year. So that'll help you as well if their fiber is a little bit shorter.
Thank you for that. Do you have any recommendations or adaptations for shearing for people that are left-handed or they don't want to do it right-handed?
Yeah, you know what? So this is a hard one to answer because when I was trained, they said you need to shear right-handed. Mm-hmm. It's a method that's taught right-handed, unfortunately. I would say if I were left-handed, I would almost I would do the shearing on a stand. And I haven't tried the other method. I'm sure you could just do everything flipped the other way, the New Zealand method, and do it left-handed. But a lot of the combs and cutters also, not the cutters, the combs are for right-handed people. That being said, you can get some combs without the splay on the side, where it kind of looks like a wing kind of goes out. You can get ones that don't have that. So that could be, for right or left-handed people. yeah, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I was actually wondering that too. When I was watching that. The dance is beautiful, but it would be hard to kind of adapt it for the other.
Yeah.
So we have time for two more questions. One being, could you please comment on crutching techniques for lambing? How much wool to remove?
Yeah, so for lambing, so I would do it at least a month before lambing if you can. You don't want, if you're doing it the New Zealand method, you don't want to be kind of balling the sheep up really close to lambing. And I would take the belly wool off and then the crutch area. So in doing, and be careful when you get close to the bottom there, to the bag, because it will be larger, right, if it's getting closer to lambing. But take the belly wool off so that when the lamb does come out, it has access to the teats. And the crutch area, so that's the back legs, and then in between the legs. Have that all cleared off, and you could get a little bit of what they call the undermine as well, which is the rear end area. That way all that wool is away from the back end and from the teats for the lamb.
Thank you. And then final question that we have time for this afternoon is, what type of oil do you use for your cutter or on your cutter?
Oh yeah, good question. I use, now it's on the top of my head now. It's the blade oil. Shoot, the name of it has slipped my mind. But to be honest, I just, it's on Amazon. And so you can you can order the oil, and it's only at $2.50, I think, a bottle. It's pretty cheap. It'll, if you search on Amazon for cutter, or clipper oil, it'll come up. It's a blue and white bottle. Sorry, I can't remember the name of it, but it's pretty inexpensive, and you should have a lot of it on hand because you're going to want to oil your blades regularly while you're cutting.
Excellent. And I know there's a couple other questions that came in that perhaps we'll be able to follow up with offline, but I wanted to just move through. There are references in this presentation that Amber listed out.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Did you want to say anything about those, or that was kind of what you?
Yeah, that's kind of the main things that are referred to in this presentation. The Washington State and California State Universities, I can't say enough about and how good they are with their programs, both of them. The American Sheep Industry Association, that's kind of like the main American source to go to for all. And again, the Wool Away book by Godfrey Bowen, that's kind of just like the father of the New Zealand method of shearing. If you're interested in that historical aspect, you can have a look at that book.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I do have just a couple things to share with you all before we sign off today. As I mentioned, immediately following this webinar, you'll be asked to complete a very, very brief survey. So if you could just take a minute to tell us about your experience, that'd be wonderful, and we'll use that feedback for future webinars. Also, a recording of this webinar and the presentation slides will be available. These documents will be archived on our website, and I'm also going to email them all out to you tomorrow, along with some of the links that Amber mentioned. I can include a link to that to the video. We do have heaps of other webinars coming up this winter, including a 3-part series that many of you may be interested in February. Please join us to learn more about how to defeat parasites in small ruminant animals, including goats and sheep. Our presenter will be Linda Kofi from the NCAT and ATRA, who's a program specialist there. And finally, in case you haven't heard, the application deadline to participate in FACT's Humane Farming Mentorship Program is coming up very soon, later this week on January 31st. This is a year-long phone-based program that's designed for livestock and poultry farmers who wish to raise their animals on pasture. It's very flexible and can be tailored to meet individual goals and needs, and I would just refer you to our website for more details and to apply online. So on that note, do you have any parting thoughts, Amber, before we close the webinar?
I would just hope you guys all give it a try. It's something that may seem hard at first, but give it a try, and the more you do, the easier it'll become for you.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Amber, for your fantastic presentation. It's been a real honor and pleasure to have you on the webinar today. And I'd like to also thank our audience members for your attention and interest. And I certainly hope that you will join us on a future webinar. Have a wonderful afternoon, evening, and please stay safe and warm as the polar vortex descends on us, or at least some of us. Goodbye.